Both Iran and the US have said that they do not want to go to war, yet America has raised the threat level in the Middle East, saying the danger comes from Iranian-backed forces in the region. But there seems to be conflicting signals, with a British general contradicting US assessments of the risk. Peter Bowes has more details.
An escalation in activities by Iran is how the US justified its military build-up in the Middle East, sending a warship and B-52 bombers to the region. But now a different view of the threat from the British General Christopher Ghika, who's a deputy commander with the coalition's Operation Inherent Resolve. During a press briefing at the Pentagon, he said he wasn't concerned about the danger of Iranian-backed forces.
There's been no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces in Iraq and Syria. We're aware of their presence, clearly, and we monitor them along with a whole range of others.
He insisted his assessment was not at odds with the US government, pointing out that coalition forces were not operating against Iran and that he was referring only to the threat of Iranian-backed militias. The next step is unclear. President Trump has denied a report that the Pentagon has drawn up a plan that calls for up to 120,000 troops to be deployed to the Middle East.
I think it's fake news, okay? Now, would I do that? Absolutely. But we have not planned for that. Hopefully, we're not going to have to plan for that. And if we did that, we'd send a hell of a lot more troops than that.
Speaking in Russia, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the United States was not seeking a war with Iran, but would respond if its interests were attacked. Peter Bowes, BBC News.
All right, we continue on. Top of the hour, you're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. We have more breaking news this afternoon out of the White House. The White House counsel has flatly rejected the House Judiciary Committee's request for documents in its sweeping investigation of possible obstruction of justice and abuses of power. The House Judiciary Chairman, Jerry Nadler, responding this way.
This is the White House claiming that the president is a king. This is the White House saying that the Justice Department says they can't hold the president accountable because you can't indict a president, and now they're saying neither can Congress. So the president is totally unaccountable and above the law. No president, no person in the United States is above the law. This is preposterous.
CNN political director David Chalian is with me. You hear Chairman Nadler's response. Just listening to Manu reporting it out last hour, he said it best. You know, it's like this clash that continues to escalate, right? One side versus the other until poof, potentially impeachment proceedings.
Yeah, and now they're not even really talking about the substance at this point. They are questioning each other's motives at this point. Something that you get to a new level in politics when you're just so distrustful of the other guy. We've seen President Trump say a blanket policy, right? The Democrats are not getting anything. This letter goes so much more to the core of this, claiming that Jerry Nadler doesn't have jurisdiction over here, which does seem like a far-fetched claim. I don't know that they are thinking that President Trump is a king, as Jerry Nadler says, but there is no doubt that it is the purview of the House Judiciary Committee.
It's their job.
Yeah, to follow up on potential obstruction of justice claims that, as Nadler wrote in his letter, are clearly laid out in the Mueller report. I can't think of something more in the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee.
So now what, right? As everyone's been watching the tit for tat back and forth, and now you just explained how it ratcheted up to a whole new level, where does this go?
Well, it's going to go to the courts, right? I mean, that's actually where it's going to end up. And that's why, last week when you heard Jerry Nadler say constitutional crisis and Nancy Pelosi echo those words, some longtime legal observers say, well, the thing that would be a constitutional crisis is if the court were to order the turning over of these documents and then President Trump and the White House counsel still refused. Then there would be no system of checks and balances. So I don't see how this doesn't go to the court. But to your point, Brooke, you said, this could go all the way to impeachment. And I think it's so fascinating to watch what's going on here politically, because with each of these moves, as Nancy Pelosi put it, the White House, the president, his representatives are indeed goading the Democrats into impeachment. And that's why Nancy Pelosi is so wary politically of it. But it is also why she and Jerry Nadler and others who have been resistant to this say that they have to continue to go through methodically, step by step, as you said, be exhaustive, because it may be that it does lead to impeachment proceedings.
Part of that, we should also point out, Manu was also reporting out when he talked to Chairman Nadler that Nadler is then going to slap these people on the White House side with fines. with fines if they don't provide the documentation that they want.
I mean, you now hear the chairman of the Judiciary Committee comfortable with something. I don't think this provision of the House has been utilized in decades. The notion not only fining, but actually detaining some members of the administration for not appearing or not handing over documents. It sounds like out of a novel that you couldn't imagine, but this is two co-equal branches at a full-on battle right now, fully infused with politics, of course, a full-on battle, and I don't see how it gets fully resolved without that third branch, the courts, the judiciary coming in.
Okay, David Chalian, thank you so much. Let me bring in Democratic California Congressman John Garamendi. He is with me now. Congressman, a pleasure. Thank you so much, sir.
Certainly.
To just the point of the conversation we were just having, your reaction to this new escalation in this standoff between the White House and Congress.
This is only one part of that escalation. Certainly this issue of subpoenas and information is a very fundamental question of power between the executive and, in this case, the legislative branch. There's another one going on right now over at the Department of Defense, where the president is assuming the appropriation power of Congress. The Constitution is quite clear. The only way to take money out of the Treasury is through a congressional appropriation, yet the president has, using various tools, an emergency declaration and others, already appropriated to himself for his border wall over $2.5 billion, and there's another $3 billion that he is targeting, all of that without any congressional approval at all.
But when you hear, just to David's point about this all sounds like a novel, to hear Chairman Nadler, talking about fining these members of the administration and detaining them if they do not turn over these necessary documents.
Well,
where are we?
Well, we are in the midst of a major confrontation that will, should the president be successful, both in the use of his power to, well, his non-existent power to appropriate money, there really is no need for a Congress. He can simply appropriate whatever money he thinks necessary for whatever that might be. That is a major confrontation on that side. The other side is indeed the oversight. That is the role of the judiciary, the other committees. The oversight committee is, it's interesting, why do we have an oversight committee? Well, for the purposes of oversight, and of course the intelligence committee. If the president succeeds, through the courts or any other way, then the government of America is altered forever. And we will, in fact, have an elected, or perhaps an unelected, imperial king. And I think
do you agree with the word
Nadler
Nadler used, king? He called the president king.
Oh, absolutely. I've said that many times before. If the president can use various mechanisms to appropriate money for what he thinks is important without congressional approval, then why have a Congress? You, in fact, have what amounts to a king. He can dip into the Treasury for whatever he wants to do, wherever that may be, including a war. And that is also going on right now in the Middle East.
Let's talk about that.
Sure.
Let me just jump in for people who don't. So the other bit of breaking news this hour that President Trump is meeting right now with his Secretary of State, with Mike Pompeo, as tensions are escalating with Iran. The State Department is ordering all non-essential U.S. personnel out of Iraq and warning Americans against any travel there, saying that they fear that there is, quote, high risk for violence and kidnapping. We are being told that Secretary Pompeo is expected to brief all House members on Iran next week. But I know, Congressman, you just had a DOD briefing this morning. What were the key takeaways for you?
Well, the key takeaways is that Iraq and Syria and the Persian Gulf remain a very dangerous area. Frankly, I heard nothing new that wasn't going on for the previous year and a half, 2 years. In fact, it was much worse when ISIS was active and there were actual military actions against ISIS. We now have a different circumstance there. The remnants of ISIS are still around. Iran's surrogates, the Shia militia, are still there. Iraq will be proceeding in the days and months ahead against those militias. Yes, it is a dangerous place, but is it necessary to have B-52s? Is it necessary to have a new an aircraft carrier and the Marines? I've heard nothing that would indicate that there is something new that would cause the current level of concern, current level of drumbeat of war. I don't see it there. It's not been explained to us yet.
To that point, this British general was on the receiving end of a rare rebuke from the Pentagon for saying essentially what you're saying, right? That there was no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces in Syria or Iraq, contradicting recent U.S. claims. State Department says this general's wrong. Given what you have heard, what you know, who do you believe?
Well, I do not trust the president. He is a pathological liar on most everything. And what we're beginning to see is it filtering down into the other agencies. When the Department of Defense tells me one day that the Air Force is going to have to shut down operations because they do not have $1 billion to replace the money they had to spend on the replenishment of Tyndall Air Force Base and Offutt Air Force Base, and then the very next days taking $2 billion out of the Department of Defense operations, saying that those operations are not important, but what is important is a border wall. They have totally lost my trust for the Department of Defense. The Secretary cannot be trusted.
Are you telling me that you are trusting this British general instead of the President of the United States?
I am trusting what I heard. What I heard is information that indicates that there is a threat, but it's the same threat that was there 6 months ago, a year ago. And in fact, it is less because ISIS is defeated. Yes, there are problems in Iraq. Yes, there are concerns in Iraq. Do we need an aircraft carrier to deal with those? Do we need B-52 bombers? Or do we have the drumbeat of war here? Are we headed for a Gulf of Tonkin situation? I believe we may very well be in that situation.
Understood, sir. Congressman Garamendi, thank you very much. Coming up next.
I'm going to give you a live look right now at Capitol Hill, where President Trump is going to be speaking any moment now at the annual event and gathering honoring fallen law enforcement officers on Capitol Hill. We're going to bring you his remarks live when he begins. Meanwhile, there are troubling new signs of the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran. Just this morning, the State Department is now ordering all non-emergency staff to leave Iraq right away, citing intelligence that Iran was threatening Americans and American interests in the region. Intelligence that top allies now seem to be questioning. The British Defense Ministry is coming to the defense of one of its top generals today, after that general told reporters at the Pentagon yesterday that he does not see an increased threat from Iran right now. Joining me from the Pentagon is CNN's Barbara Starr with much more on this. Barbara, what are you hearing there?
Well, you know, Kate, it's an unusual dust-up between two close allies right out in public. The British general was basically saying he doesn't see a change in the ongoing existing threat that is always there from Iranian-backed forces inside Iraq. He was very clear that it's something they see, they follow, they track, and something he felt prepared to deal with on behalf of the troops in the coalition. So the Pentagon, the U.S. Central Command, the portion that oversees operations in the Middle East, kind of fired back yesterday with a public statement saying that the general's remarks, the British general's remarks, did not follow the line of intelligence that the U.S. saw. This morning, the British MOD in London, the Ministry of Defense, firing back at the U.S., defending its general, saying he was talking about day-to-day operations. Look, amidst all of this kerfuffle, the bottom line is there is skepticism in a lot of quarters about the intelligence, and people are waiting for the U.S. to come out publicly and show some of the evidence it has of this increased threat. Right now, we are told that intelligence remains highly classified. They're going to see what they can bring out in public, but so far, they're not showing it. Kate?
And how more important that it comes every day to see that evidence. Good to see you, Barbara. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Coming up for us.